Hi, I was trying to figure out how to convert for these Foster connectors into electrical connectors and found a technique using by printing some inserts which are posted on Thingiverse and using these banana plug contacts which you can see here, which are tiny little contacts, details of which are on the Thingiverse posting, and these just slot together like that really easily and give a good contact. They've got a rounded tip on them so they make the insertion less accurate in terms of the lining up. They'll sort of self-locate. To do this, I'm using some silicon wire, which is very flexible, so it makes it easier to fit it inside the connector. And also I'm using these adapters that I designed. So this example cable, this is a bad example really because it's solid core and you shouldn't really be using solid core for a sort of flexible cable like this because it'll break at some point, but it's all I've got handy for this demo. They've got two styles of Foster connector. These ones where they you can put the conduit over the outside and cable tie over the top of it, or this one which I prefer, which is where you can screw the conduit by splitting it just for a centimetre down the first centimetre of the conduit and screw it onto, and it sort of self-taps onto the conduit and gives you a really firm connection. I like that one best, but today, because I've already made that one up, we're going to have a look at this particular connector. And also the bulkhead connector which goes onto the trap if you're doing this for a Ghostbusters trap. So first things first, we need to have a look at the contacts. So we need to solder up the contacts first of all. And we tin them first. And the aim is basically to get as little as possible onto the contacts so they don't end up too wide. And we're also going to tin the wire. And again, you want as little as possible on the end of the wire. You don't want too much to be working with. So pull it back. I'm going to trim that down even further. Just so we've got the minimum we possibly can. And I'm going to pop this into these connectors. Just tin the soldering iron a little bit. It goes as well when you try to do it on camera as it does normally. So that's one done. We'll get the other one done. There we go. That's two done. So that's the female. That's the male. So we need to do that first so the heat doesn't damage the 3D printed part. And next, we need to create the female holder. So what we do is we open the vise just a little bit, and there's two sides to this printed part. That's the back side, which was on the build plate, and what I've done is I've actually taken that off the build plate when it's printed with a raft on it, and then I've used the standing knife just to take a few mils off the end of that, just give a nice clean backside to it. And you can tell the difference because there's a very slight, if you printed it correctly, you can probably just about make it out. There's a very slight sort of chamfer sort of going into the connector body there. So you get the female one, which is the one with the hole there. Feed the cable through that part, and you open the vise just a tiny bit, enough to let the cable through, but enough to give it some support for what you're about to do, which is to hammer using a small hammer like this one, that into position. So put that one there. And then we've got to do the pin, similar principle. Make sure the coal's nice and clean, feed it through. And on this one, we're going to just tap it through until it gets that thinner bit in the middle there. So we're just going to put the cable through the middle of the vise again. We're just going to line that up so it's nice and vertical. Give it a hammer. And you should be able to see that that's just taking the first bit of that connector in. We're going to take the foster connector part, so we'll take the back off it. Be all familiar with this. This is the fiddly bit that the original instructions had. You take all the spring out and solder to it and everything, but I just didn't like that solution, hence went down this route instead. Get a screwdriver and just take out the rubber ring that's in the middle there. We don't need it. So you should now have an empty shell and empty backside to that connector. We've got the wire we're going to connect it to, which is I've pre-prepared, so I've stripped one of the cores, or you can put a pair if you've got a multi-core like this, and put it back over the jacket like that. You see why in a second. And this is going to be the main core. So we put that through the back of the connector and push it in. You can see as I'm pushing that in now, that wire there is actually making a good contact with the connector body. And what we can do is we can actually also, for double measure, push that back over the back of the connector, cut it off, so you see what it's like now, and then we can tape that on later, or put a bolt over the top of it, or whatever we like to do. And we then have these center cores, which I'm using for the main conductor, and I'm going to take that back as far as I dare into the connector like that. And actually, I'm just going to undo that for a second because I need to actually strip the inner core of that one a little bit. So I'm just going to take that. I'm going to just take the ends of those ones off. Should really do these individually, shouldn't I? There we go. Okay, slight edit. So we've got the pin here with the tail cable on it, a bit of heat shrink ready to slid onto the back of that, and we're just going to tack this onto the cable here, a bit of solder. It would fall away. Should really be clamping this in the vise, because that would make it a bit easier. But now I want to make it difficult for myself, don't I? Right, so that's on there. See that's dry now. And just slip that heat shrink back over that once it's cool. There. I'm just going to close that heat shrink down. Over that connection. I do have a heat gun for that, but this works just as well. We'll pull the connector back through a little bit. And what we're going to do is, you can see the shapes here. We're going to try and fold, or coil, should I say, this into a coil in this cup, and then as we push this in, it's a really tight fit. You can actually feel the layers of the print as you do it. And again, you can put it in the vise to make it a little bit easier to do. A vise makes all of this process a lot easier. So I've now pushed that in. See, it's now flush. And the back, again, you push the cable back in, because remember we're trying to get this wire to make a good contact with the body of the connector. And just fold that back over, and I'm going to trim that a bit more now it's in, we know where it's going to end up. And then we can, we've got a few options on that. You can try and put a loose nut over the top of it to try and keep it in contact, or you can try and tape it like this, but you might want a decent bit of tape so that you can get a bit of pressure on it to make sure it's nice and tight. And now if we imagine you put the conduit over the top of this and then cable tie over the top of the conduit, so for example with one of these little cable ties, and that all helps try and keep that in that core there against the body. Now we do the next bit, which is getting the body connector again, screw it in, and if you see, you've now got a contact in the middle, the outside is joined, and you can then slide the conduit over the top, put the cable tie around, do your old bit of red tape, whatever you want to do for the realistic look, and that's the male connector. The female connector, the bulkhead one, is this little one we've got here. I'll just reposition the camera a bit so we can see this one. I'll put that in the vise as well. I've decided the vise is actually pretty important in all this if you're going to have an easy time with it. Now on this one you've got a choice. I've got quite good friction fit going with my printer, printing with a 0.4 nozzle, 0.2 nozzle, sorry. But you may choose to put just a little tiny sliver of, just literally a tiniest drop of super glue on the outside of that. But then you put that into the top of the connector, and again we're going to just tap that in with the hammer, trying to keep it straight. And this should be enough to hold it. And tap it in until it's flush with the front, like that. And at that point, you've now got the wire coming out of the back. So you can strip that wire. So that's your middle contact, which will make contact to the middle of the Foster connector that we just made, which was over there. And the outside body of this connector is your contact to the outside body, which obviously is now coming out on the back of here. And those two will now mate together and form a good electrical contact. Now then, what you do need to do is get a contact on this side as well. So for that, when you've screwed it into the body, if I can find an example here, what you do is you strip a nice long piece of wire, like that, say, and as you put it in, you wrap that right around. I'll do it a little bit longer what I've done there, so that it's contacting all those threads. And then I've got a printed 3D printed nut, which I just basically screw on the back of there. And you imagine the panels in between, and the nut actually goes slightly over the top of some of these strands, you can sort of see there, and that gets you a good contact to the outside of the body. And that just that wire just exits between, gets squished between the panel back and the nut. One other note, you can, like you put a spot of super glue on the outside of this one, whatever you do, don't try and push them together for like a few hours after you've done that. If you do put a spot of super glue on there, because there's I tried that on one side of these connectors and you couldn't get them apart again once I'd done it. It's just a little warning to you. But if the pin in the male connector, you're having trouble with that one again, you can just drop some super glue around it to get it to properly sit and stay in the plastic. All the ones I've done are friction fit because I designed the piece with my printer and I know the filament I used and everything else, so it's really firm and the friction's fine. It doesn't need any super glue on mine. But I can imagine some of people may have different tolerances on printers. You may find out it doesn't come out quite as well.